Morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a meeting of the Tulare County Audit Committee. We will begin today's meeting real quick. Just do a roll call real fast. Make sure that we have a quorum to conduct business.
Jason Britt,
Present.
Pete Vanderpool,
Present.
Jennifer Flores,
Present.
Charlie Norman.
Here.
All right.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Want to confirm that. I'm just being formal because you asked me to be. All right. Okay, item 1 on today's agenda is public comment. At this time, members of the public may comment to the audit committee regarding anything that is in our jurisdiction that is not appearing on today's agenda. Public comment can and will be limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Is there anyone here wishing to speak under the public comment period? Right, seeing no one, I will close the public comments and move on to item 2. This is a request to approve the meeting minutes from the July 8th, 2021 meeting. I can't believe we haven't met since July, but
It's been a while.
Chair will entertain a motion.
Move for approval.
All right, have a motion.
Second.
From Member Britt, second from Chief Norman. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, the same. Motion passes unanimously. All right, next we're going to move on to item 3. This is a request to review and accept the countywide Voyager fuel card risk-based audit report.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Kristen Odom, and I'm a principal accountant auditor. The countywide Voyager fuel card audit, it covered the 3-month period of May 1st through July 31st, 2019. Sorry, I'm trying to change the slides here. Is it just that? Okay, thank you. Okay, so the audit covered the 3-month period of May 1st through July 31st, 2019. And the first several slides will just cover some background information. So the county has 6 fueling stations located throughout the county. They have both unleaded and diesel fuels, and that's purchased in bulk at a discounted price as compared to retail locations. Hours vary by location and season, although the station at the Visalia Courthouse is operable 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. During the scope of the audit, the fuel from county stations cost just over $750,000. In addition to county stations, employees can purchase fuel for their vehicles using Voyager fuel cards. And they are credit cards issued by US Bank, and they're accepted at a wide range of network gas stations. The greatest benefit of these cards is that employees are able to fill county vehicles when they're traveling outside of the county, when they're in remote locations within the county, or when county fueling stations aren't available. The Fleet Services Division of the General Services Agency manages the Voyager account for most departments. RMA, Fire, and Solid Waste oversee their own accounts. And during the scope of the audit, the cost of Voyager cards was just over $150,000. Let's see. So the graph on this slide shows the Voyager card purchases by department during the 3 months of our audit. Fire, Sheriff, and RMA combined to make 81% of all Voyager purchases. And it should be noted that Assessor, County Council, and TCICT had Voyager cards assigned to their departments, but they didn't make any purchases during this period.
We should look into electric fire trucks.
Is that a motion?
Okay, so during our audit, the county had over 800 Voyager cards. And the graph on this slide shows the number of transactions per card during the 3-month period. So as you can see, over half of them weren't used at all. And 83% of the cards were used less than 5 times. And so this graph shows the total fuel cost by department during the scope of our audit. So the fuel obtained at county stations is shown in blue. Fuel purchased with Voyager cards is shown in red. And then in addition to those, fire department actually has some bulk fuel at some of their stations. So the cost of that is shown in yellow. So as you can see, the majority of fuel was purchased at county stations. And because most departments assign a Voyager card to each vehicle, we examine vehicle assignments and basic vehicle records as part of the audit. So as of July 31st, 2019, the county had over 1,400 vehicles. 66% of the vehicles were pooled. This means they weren't assigned to an individual and they were available to any employee needing temporary transportation for county business. 14% were assigned to an individual employee, but they were not available for take-home use. And 19% were categorized as take-home. This means they were assigned to an individual employee and allowed to be taken home between shifts, including for commuting on a regular basis. So this graph shows the number of vehicles and their use category by department. Blue represents pooled vehicles, red is assigned vehicles, and yellow are take-home vehicles. And you'll see there's a little bit of gray in the graph, and those are vehicles that the use category wasn't identified by the department. So we performed several procedures during our audit. We evaluated departmental controls through questionnaires that were sent to departments, and we examined their policies and procedures governing Voyager cards. We reviewed all Voyager transactions that were made during the scope to determine whether purchases were made near county fueling stations, whether the type of fuel and number of gallons purchased were appropriate for the assigned vehicle, whether non-fuel items were purchased, whether purchases exceeded the card purchase limits, and whether a single card was used multiple times in a short time frame. We also compared vehicle GPS data to the locations Voyager cards were used in order to verify that the vehicle was in the location that the purchase was made. During the scope of our audit, only 28% of the county's vehicles had GPS installed. We also tested that employees who made fuel purchases didn't submit a travel claim for mileage reimbursement. We noted several strengths of the county during our audit. All of the Voyager statements were paid on time, and the county has implemented many modernizations to improve fuel tracking. Voyager cards allow data tracking and safeguards. The majority of vehicles now have GPS installed. So since when we did this audit, they've installed it on many vehicles. GPS has several benefits, including increased theft recovery and the ability to better monitor employee activity. All 6 county stations have microchip readers, which ensure that fuel will only be dispensed into authorized vehicles. As of our report date, approximately 75% of vehicles had a microchip. And although the county has many strengths, we noted several areas of deficiency in internal controls as compliance, as noted in the following findings. So finding A, no written countywide Voyager fuel card policies and procedures. Although the county has a credit card policy, it's silent on fuel cards, which have unique requirements that don't apply to other credit cards. Many departments developed internal policies and procedures for Voyager cards. However, they varied and most didn't address all aspects of Voyager use. We observed conflicting guidance in the following areas. So assigning Voyager cards. Solid Waste and Fleet and the departments under Fleet's purview, they assign Voyager fuel cards to specific vehicles, and then each card is meant only to be used to purchase fuel for that vehicle. Fire provides a card to most full-time and some extra help employees. And RMA has departmental cards that are available for checkout as they're needed. We also noticed that some departments have vehicles that are filled exclusively at county stations. And so they only have Voyager cards for the vehicles that would need them. Whereas other departments have a card for every vehicle, even if they're rarely used. We also noticed conflicting guidance on how cards should be stored. Many departments keep them in a secure location such as a safe, but other departments reported keeping them in the vehicle's glove box, which could be susceptible to break-ins or theft. There were differing acceptable purchase locations. Ag used the cards exclusively within the county boundaries, but other departments forbid that, and it can only be used when traveling outside of the county. And only some policies encourage purchasing fuel at the least expensive station available. We observed very acceptable purchase items. Some departments allowed car washes to be purchased, and others also allowed for emergency vehicle repairs, whereas other departments only allowed for fuel to be bought. There were varied documentation requirements. Some departments maintain mileage logs or require receipts, and other departments don't require any documentation. And the different Voyager accounts have different methodologies for assigning PINs. PINs can be an effective control against fraud, but most of the cards owned by the county, they allow multiple PINs to successfully be used. And then lastly, we found different levels of employee training and acknowledgement. Employees aren't trained on the use of Voyager cards, and they aren't required to sign a cardholder agreement on a countywide level, but some departments have implemented this internally. So overall, these inconsistent practices can lead to discrepancies, poor records, employee confusion, and unnecessary expenses to the county. We recommended that General Services, as the main administrator of Voyager fuel cards, establish written countywide policies and procedures to govern their use. Individual departments should have the authority to create stricter policies to address unique operational needs if necessary. And once finalized, the written policies should be distributed to all employees, and authorized users should be required to sign a cardholder agreement indicating their understanding of the policies, their expectations, and responsibilities. Oops. So finding B, some transaction limits appear too high. Each Voyager account has set purchase limits for single transactions and also for the total monthly amount that can be purchased on a card. And those are shown in the table on the left side of the slide. During the scope of our audit, the largest single transaction for RMA was $130, and for solid waste, it was $145, which are much less than their respective single transaction limits. However, solid waste limit was large enough to allow for emergency vehicle repairs, which was included in their department's policy. Additionally, the most transactions for a single card in a day for fire was 4, whereas their limit is 10 transactions. And multiple cards under fleet had 3 transactions in a single day, which is their daily limit. The graph on this slide shows the highest monthly total that was purchased on a single card for each department. So the yellow bars represent the departments under fleet services. The highest monthly total was for sheriff, and they purchased just over $1,100 on a single card, which is less than half the monthly limit of $3,000. Fire is shown in red, similarly purchased less than half of their monthly limit. Now, RMA, which is shown in blue, and solid waste shown in green, they both purchase closer to their monthly limit. Therefore, those appear reasonable for their business needs. Card transaction limits should more closely align with actual needs. Allowing transaction limits to greatly exceed business needs exposes the county to a higher monetary risk, especially if a card is stolen. We recommended that Voyager account administrators evaluate the use of their cards and determine whether transaction limits should be adjusted to better align with business needs. So finding C, microchips are not consistently used. The The county installed microchip readers at all 6 county fueling stations in February 2017 in an effort to prevent fraud, reduce data input errors, and increase efficiency. If a vehicle is equipped with a microchip, all transaction data is automatically recorded. As of the date of our report, approximately 75% of county vehicles had a microchip installed. If a vehicle doesn't have a microchip, the employee can use a gas boy card to obtain fuel at the county stations. If they don't have either a microchip on the vehicle or a gas boy card, then the employee is forced to use a Voyager card to buy fuel at retail stations, which can result in unnecessary costs to the county. So as shown on a previous slide, departments primarily use county fueling stations as compared to Voyager fuel cards, with the exception of fire. Fire reported having difficulties using county fueling stations after the implementation of the microchips. However, per inquiry with fleet, many of the issues that occurred early on with the microchips have been resolved. So we recommended that departments encourage their employees to fill up at county fueling stations and ensure that their employees are able to do so. If a microchip becomes defective or falls off, departments should work with fleet to resolve the issue. So finding D in county fuel purchases. During the scope of our audit, the average cost of unleaded fuel purchased with Voyager cards was $4 a gallon, as compared to an average cost of $3.11 at county stations. The average cost of diesel was $4.01 per gallon for Voyager cards, as compared to $3.23 for diesel, or $3.23 at county stations. In addition to the issues with microchips that we previously mentioned, some departments reported that there were times that pumps at county fueling stations didn't work and employees were forced to use their Voyager card within the county. While not always feasible due to operational hours and location, if all of the in-county Voyager card purchases had instead been obtained at county stations, this would have been a savings of over $20,000 during the scope of our audit, or $83,000 annually. We recommended that departments ensure employees are aware of the county fueling stations and utilize them while they're within the county or prior to traveling outside of county limits whenever possible. In addition, fleet should be notified of inoperable fueling stations so that the issue can be resolved as soon as possible. Finding E, premium grade fuel purchased. Per inquiry with fleet, the county does not own any vehicles that require premium grade fuel. However, during the scope of our audit, 6 departments made 141 purchases of premium grade fuel, which are shown in the graph. Assuming unleaded plus is 10 cents more per gallon and unleaded super is 20 cents more per gallon than regular unleaded, the additional cost to the county was $271 during the scope of our audit, or over $1,000 annually. We recommended that departments review their monthly Voyager fuel card statements for any unnecessary premium grade fuel purchases. If any are found, they should be addressed with employees to help ensure they do not continue to occur. Okay. Finding F, multiple transactions in a short time frame. We observed many instances in which a single Voyager card made 2 or more purchases within minutes of each other. Multiple transactions in a short time frame could be an indicator of fraud, such as filling up in unauthorized vehicles. In the majority of instances, the total gallons purchased exceeded the fuel tank size of the card's assigned vehicle. Departments were able to provide explanations for the instances we observed, but due to a lack of records, we were unable to verify many of the explanations. Some common causes that departments reported for multiple transactions in a short time frame were that cards were not assigned to a specific vehicle, so multiple vehicles could use the card. Also, county stations were out of order, so a single Voyager card was used to fill up multiple vehicles, and also that multiple vehicles traveled together, and so they use the same card. So while there may be situations where it's necessary to use a vehicle's assigned Voyager card, to buy fuel for another vehicle, it should be done as a last resort. It can be problematic if the vehicles belong to different departments, such as using a Voyager card assigned to a fleet vehicle to purchase fuel for department-owned vehicles. And we actually observed this occurring during our audit. It can lead to inaccurate internal exchange transactions, which are used for interdepartmental billing. And it can be particularly problematic for subvented departments. So in addition, allowing the practice of making multiple purchases on a single card, it increases the risk that an employee could take advantage of it and fill a personal vehicle at the same time as their county vehicle. We recommended that departments ensure each vehicle fills up with a separate Voyager fuel card. If this can't be followed due to emergencies, then departments should maintain receipts for the purchases, document which vehicles were filled and which employees were involved. And also, as previously mentioned, fleet should be notified of any inoperable county stations so the issue can be resolved. Finding G, records are not always adequate. Departments are responsible for ownership of their assets, including keeping records. During the course of our audit, we found some departments have inadequate records in relation to their vehicles and respective Voyager fuel cards. There were instances in which some departments were unable to verify whether certain vehicles were categorized as assigned, take home, or pooled, who certain vehicles are assigned to, who temporarily used a certain vehicle, who made certain Voyager card purchases, or which vehicle or piece of equipment fuel was purchased for. This lack of adequate records limited our ability to perform certain audit tests on purchases. For example, there were instances in which we could not test whether the type of fuel purchase was correct for the vehicle, the amount of fuel purchased, whether the amount of fuel purchased exceeded the vehicle's tank capacity, whether the vehicle was in the location of the purchase according to the GPS report, or whether the employee claimed mileage reimbursement for the use of a county vehicle. So it can be difficult for departments to verify the accuracy and validity of transactions without adequate records. This increases the likelihood that unauthorized or fraudulent purchases will be made and go undetected. We recommended that departments develop a system or process to maintain adequate historical records of their vehicles and Voyager cards. At a minimum, they should be able to identify the make, model, and type of fuel used by each vehicle and whether they're categorized as assigned, take home, or pooled. They should be able to identify the employee and Voyager fuel card assigned to each vehicle, if applicable. For pooled vehicles, they should know the employee who temporarily used a vehicle and the Voyager card. And they should also know the employee who made each Voyager purchase and which vehicle the fuel was purchased for. Finding H, receipts are not consistently required across departments. So many departments don't require employees to keep receipts for Voyager purchases, and that leaves no record to reconcile the card statements to. Of the 4 departments that are responsible for Voyager account administration, only RMA and Solid Waste reported that they perform a reconciliation against any sort of transaction record. Fleet reviews the statements for regular activity. However, it's not guaranteed to catch all errors. A lack of receipts could lead to fraudulent purchases and errors in statements going unnoticed, which could create an unnecessary cost to the county. Consistent with county policies for other credit cards, we recommended that the county require employees to obtain receipts for all Voyager card purchases, which will improve accountability. Receipts should ideally be reconciled against the monthly statement. However, we realize that this might not be feasible due to a high volume of transactions. At a minimum, we recommended that departments review a sample of the receipts when reconciling their monthly statements. So that was the last finding, and this slide just summarizes the findings in which department each one is applicable to. We would like to thank all departments for their time and cooperation during this audit. And this concludes the presentation of the countywide Voyager fuel card risk-based audit report. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions or comments from members of the audit committee? All I know is I'd like to hear from the fire chief and the sheriff, man. You guys got a lot of issues here. We gotta figure out what's going on with your credit cards in your department, chief.
You know, I'd like to think that we were number one, but the sheriff is also number one. So we
Well-
are consistent with a good public safety model.
You know, there were two things that really jumped out at me that I made that one point. The second point I want to make is all of our elected department heads have a problem requiring receipts. So if you look, the assessor's office has trouble, the DA has trouble, and then the sheriff has trouble, and then the auditor is afraid to audit himself. So I'm sure he has trouble too.
You know, and just one other brief comment. You know, we have 27 stations, probably only half of them have fuel cells. And then I'm looking at that 10 swipes. What the heck is this 10 swipe thing? And I would imagine they're in fire season and a federal
Yeah.
camp isn't set up yet for supply. And so you can't just say, hey, stay here.
That's a good explanation, chief. Thanks for the follow-up. Any other comments, council?
I have a question. Is there, just curious, is there a reason why the other 4 departments manage their own Voyager accounts apart from fleet?
You know, during the audit, we tried asking questions, but it was kind of just that was how it was always done. There never were policies on things. And so I think for those departments, maybe they had unique needs. So it was easier for them just to manage their own accounts.
Okay, and then my second question is, do you have a recommendation on how to track the bulk fuel consumption? Or is that kind of just not a feasible?
For the bulk fuel, the microchips that are at the county stations, they actually record the vehicle number, the asset number, the odometer reading. I think it records engine hours. So it records a lot of different things. So that helps track that consumption.
Okay. Thank you.
I appreciate all the work that went into this. I know this was probably a difficult one because it spanned all departments and you're having to deal with a lot of different geographic location issues and departmental specific issues. But, you know, I really do like the point in finding D about the need to educate departments about the benefit of utilizing county fueling stations versus Voyager fuel card usage. That's a significant savings annually,
Yeah.
just one to the other. And this was over a short period of time, so it could even be greater if it was looked at on a regular basis. So
Yeah.
just awareness is something that's important, I think. So
Yes.
thank you for following up on this, Jason.
Do you know if there's a way that the Voyager, whoever manages that credit card,
Mr. Voyager.
the company, is there a way that they could just sort of block back-to-back transactions? So if a transaction occurs at 10 a.m. and it concludes at 10:03, then there's like a 15-minute blackout period or something. I'm just kind of curious if there's a way we could use the card controls as a way to address some of the potential for abuse.
I don't know if they have that specific control. That's definitely something we could ask Fleet to look into. But the Voyager account, it does have a lot of different settings and security things like that built into it that you can customize. So.
Any other questions or comments? All right, that was a great report. I think this is an action item, a request to accept this report.
Move approval.
Okay, I have a motion by
Second.
council, second by CEO Britt. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, the same. Motion passes unanimously. All right, next we're going to move on to one that we've all been waiting for. You know, it's funny, you take the chief auditor and you put her in a different department, and then you take the oldest county employee that's ever worked for Tulare County and you have them retire. You know there's going to be issues, so I'm excited to hear this report. Item 4 is a request to review and accept the assessor, clerk recorder's office department head change consulting engagement report. Thank you.
Okay. So the prior department head retired on March 27th, 2021. and the current department head was appointed on April 6th. We reviewed the last 2 months of the prior department head's activity and the first month of the current department head's activity. So therefore, the scope of the engagement was January 27th through May 6th, 2021. So the office excels in many areas. The cash memos, authorization to sign statement of fees form, and inventory of personal property were submitted timely. All of the office's cash funds were counted and reconciled without exception. The personal assets assigned to the prior department head were returned timely. Both the prior and current department heads submitted their Form 700 timely, and they appeared to be filled out completely and accurately. The prior department head's access was terminated timely. The prior department head's last paycheck and benefit payout and the current department head's new pay rate were tested without exception. So although the office excels in many areas, we did find some weaknesses in the office's internal controls and compliance with policies and procedures. Finding A, cash handling. So the clerk recorder division did not count cash and reconcile it each time it changed hands. When there was a change in cashier, employees signed in and out of the receipting system, but the cash drawers were shared and they were not counted prior to changing hands. Also, access to the clerk recorder's division's undeposited cash was not restricted as required by section 3.1 of the cash manual. Although a log was maintained of employees who entered the room where the safe that held the cash was stored, 6 employees had the full combination to the safe. Additionally, the office stated that the assessor and appraiser division's cash funds had not been utilized since 2016 and 2017 respectively. Due to this lack of use, the funds were not counted and reviewed regularly as required by section 5.4 of the cash manual. Other issues we noted were that keys to cash were not kept in a secure location. An immediate supervisor did not always initial voided receipts, and not all collection sites had visible signs telling customers to request a receipt if one was not provided. Inadequate cash handling procedures increase the likelihood of taxpayer dollars being misappropriated or misplaced, and this can result not only in the loss of funds, but potentially damage the county's reputation. We recommended that the office distribute the current version of the cash manual to all employees involved in cash handling. We also recommended that the office consider issuing each cashier in the clerk recorder division their own sub-fund and cash bag, which would establish accountability between cashiers. We also recommended that the appraiser and assessor division's funds be counted and reviewed regularly, or the office should reassess the needs for the funds and close those that are no longer necessary. Additionally, keys for cash should be kept in secure locations. Voided transactions should be reviewed and initialed by a supervisor, and signs telling customers to request receipts should be displayed at all collection sites. Finding B, late deposits. 12 of the 16 deposits that we tested were late as shown in the table. Failure to make deposits timely increases the risk of cash or checks being misplaced or misappropriated. Due to the high volume of collections that the office receives, as well as limited staffing availabilities and other limitations during the pandemic, we understand that it may have been difficult to make the deposits in a timely manner. We recommended that the office adhere to the guidelines in the cash manual regarding the frequency of deposits to the county treasury. If the deposit frequency isn't feasible based on staffing and collection times, then the office should request an exception from the auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector's office. Finding C, final pay card not signed. The prior department head's final pay card was not completed until after their final day worked. Therefore, they were unable to sign it. When forms lack signatures, it can create questions over accuracy. An inaccurate final pay card can lead to an incorrect benefits payout check and also incorrect retirement payments. We recommended that the office ensure all documents requiring a signature are completed and signed by the department head prior to leaving the position. To aid in this, the office should be aware of necessary documents to be signed when an employee separates from the county. And we also noted another issue, And the underlying cause was outside of the office's responsibility. So this is kind of an appendix to the report instead of in the report. The current department head was authorized to receive an increase in healthcare benefits upon their promotion. However, the increase went into effect 2 pay periods late, and this resulted in a delay of nearly $580. It appears the error was due to an incorrect benefit amount memo that was initially issued, and we communicated the issue to the responsible department. So this concludes the presentation of the Assessor Clerk Recorder's Office Department Head Change Consulting Engagement Report.
All right, you know, that really wasn't all that bad. I was actually expecting a lot more for a 40-year county employee retiring. But then again, I guess we have to do a follow-up report and audit on the collusion between the former auditor's office employee that's now running the current assessor's department that you just did your report and analysis on. I'm kidding. Any questions or comments?
If there are no questions or comments, I'll move approval.
All right, we have a motion from CO Britt, second
Second.
from Chief Norman. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same. Motion passes unanimously. And it's awful fun to ding Eddie's gavel. So I'll point that out. All right. Next, we're going to move on to item 5 on our agenda. Item 5 is a request to review and accept the Human Resources and Development Department incoming department head change consulting engagement report.
So the prior department head retired on June 22nd, 2020, and the current department head was appointed on April 25th, 2021. Due to the length of time to appoint a new department head, we performed a separate engagement to review the outgoing department head's activity and issued that report in October 2020. So for this engagement, we examined the first month of the current department head's activity. Therefore, the scope of the engagement was April 25th through May 25th, 2021. The department excelled in many areas. The incoming cash memo was submitted timely. The department's only change fund was counted and reconciled without exception. Both cash receipts that were deposited during the scope were deposited timely. Expenditures incurred by the current department head adhered to county policies, and the current department head's first time sheet and new pay rate were tested without exception. So we only had one finding for this engagement. The current department head's date of assuming office was incorrect on their Form 700. They corrected it and a new form has been filed, so the issue's been resolved. So
let me just say, wow. But I guess that's what you get when Loopy was the assistant for like 10 years. So great job to the HR department, and let that be a model for everyone else to try to follow, because we want to keep our auditors' jobs really easy, right? I mean, that's what this community is all about. Great job. Any questions, comments?
Not one page, that's good.
Yeah.
I know.
Does someone want to buy Loopy a calendar maybe? And then we won't have any more findings? Okay. All right, we have a request to approve this.
A move for approval.
Motion by Chief Norman and a second by CAO Britt. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right. It's all about short agenda items, right? Next, we'll move on to item 6. This is a request to review and accept the fiscal year 2020-2021 cash shortages and overages memo.
All right, good morning. My name is Kelsey Tolber. I'm the Chief of Financial Reporting and Audits, and I'll be presenting this item. So this is the cash shortages and overages for fiscal year 2021. Per government code, the auditor is required to send the Board of Supervisors an account of cash shortages and overages at the end of each fiscal year. We will be sending these to the board after this meeting, but we did want to bring it to the audit committee since we take these into account during our annual risk assessment when developing our audit plan. As you can see in the table, in fiscal year 21, the county had a total of 109 instances of cash shortages, totaling just over $1,700, and 2,330 instances of cash overages, totaling nearly $9,500. It is important to note that government code allows the county to keep any overage of $10 or less, which partly explains the large number of cash overages. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So really, the only question that I would have is, have you, as the auditor's office, ever put on like a cash handling course for
Cash handling
different
course.
employees? I mean, it seems that I'm not so worried about the overages. That's fine. County works out real well for the county. But the shortages, there, can obviously be fraudulent instances. And I feel like just from my time on the audit committee that there's been a pretty regular occurrence in solid waste. So have you ever given any thought to maybe putting on a cash handling course or session for them? It might be something that could be beneficial.
So actually recently, it was, I think about 3 weeks ago, we went out to solid waste because they have been having some discrepancies between their deposit slips and what's being deposited at the bank. So we've been notified of those. It's been happening quite frequently. And so we went out to the Visalia landfill. We did a cash count. We assessed their internal controls. And then afterwards, we issued a memo to with recommendations on how to improve that. So we're hoping that that kind of helps. So.
Yeah, you might just want to try to think of some different ways to maybe keep this from happening again. Maybe memos are going to be
Yeah.
effective. I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we do try to put on a training annually. So I think that would be a good topic is cash
Yeah.
handling, that we could kind of do something like that. That would be a
Okay.
good idea.
All right, any further questions or comments?
Just comment, Mr. Chair, the fire department did not make.
Yeah,
this
that's what I was gonna
list.
say. Why would you have a question or comment? You weren't even mentioned here, chief. Go ahead, Jason.
I'm still concerned with the amount of overages.
Yeah.
Overages, still essentially, I'm assuming that means we're shorting our constituents their change back.
You're supposed to be looking out for the county's
I
bottom line,
am looking for
Jason.
the county's bottom line,
Okay.
but it's indicative, overages can signal theft and potential fraud just as much as shortages can. So that's why I'm just concerned about, what these departments who have large overages are doing to try to mitigate that. Shortages are easy because you could, either way, you got to teach people how to count money, but I just think we shouldn't lose sight that overages are not sort of better
Right.
than
No,
shortages.
and
And I
I was
wasn't
being
gonna say that.
sarcastic,
No,
but
no, I get
if you look at the overages and the fact that in the recorder's office, there was 2,100 overages totaling 5,000. It seems to me that that's, hey, here's $1 and it costs 98 cents.
Right.
And it's the 2 cents adding up over a period of time.
Yeah, so we did actually ask about that. Their big discrepancy was because customers who pay by check in the mail, so they'll calculate the wrong fees and they'll send the wrong check. And like I said, per government code, if it's $10 or less, they could keep it. But they have done many efforts to try to address it. They've contacted companies who continuously overpay and reminded them of the fee schedule. That's posted on their website, and they've been encouraging customers to pay electronically because that automatically calculates the fee versus them sending in a check and putting in the incorrect amount. So
No,
they've
that's
been making
helpful.
some effort.
To add to that for e-reporting, it's that's something that we're really focusing on. It's a lot more efficient, more effective, and it's faster for both sides. And then, like Kelsey said, that actually has the correct fee. So as times change and as less people are filling out a check and calculating their own fees, I think that'll continue to get better as we focus on increasing e-recordings. And then, again, just trying to let people know if they're continuously paying their own fee.
No, that helps a lot to understand that, so
Yeah.
that there's those instances where people just might mail in too much money. Appreciate that, thanks.
All right, anything further? Okay, this is a request to accept this report or memo.
Move approval.
All right, we have a motion from council,
Second,
second from Chief Norman. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we're going to move on to item 7. This is a request to review and accept the external peer review report.
So this one will be presented by Mr. Edmonds. He's joining us via Zoom. I believe he's on, and I'm going to help him by clicking through his slides for him.
Mr. Edmonds, you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
My clicker is not working.
You hear me? Hello? Kelsey, can you hear me? The hell?
Hey, Cass, do you just want to give us presentation?
Well, can you, let me,
I can hear you now, Mike.
oh, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Ready to get started then?
Yep, go for it. The floor is yours.
You got it? Oh, you got it?
Got it?
Oh, there it goes.
There you go. Good morning, everybody. Chair Vanderpool, members of the Audit Committee. I'm Mike Edmonds, and I conducted the peer review of the Tulare County Auditor Controller's Financial Reporting and Audits Division. The review I conducted was to assess whether the Audit Division was in conformance with the international standards for the professional practice of internal auditing, or IIA standards promulgated by the Institute of Internal Auditors. Today, I'm going to brief you on the objectives, methodology, scope, and results of the review. And I'd also be happy to answer any questions you might have regarding the review. But before I do that, I would like to go over the review requirements and my qualifications to conduct the review. Next slide. Oh, that, okay, you're there. Okay. And as this slide shows, that the IA standards require that an external assessment or peer review be conducted of the internal audit activity every 5 years by a qualified internal assessor. Next slide. I conducted the last review on November 2016. So the current review was conducted within the 5-year time frame as the standards required. Next slide. And this slide is going to show my qualifications to conduct a review, which I believe that my qualifications are in accordance with the IA standards, which require the peer reviewer to be independent and knowledgeable of the internal auditing and the peer review process. I am independent of the audit organization and staff. I have just met them through my work. Also, I have over 35 years of experience managing government audit agencies, both in state and local government, and I'm a certified internal auditor. Finally, I've conducted over 30 peer reviews of various governmental auditing organizations, including cities, counties, transit agencies, planning agencies, airport authorities, and private firms. And now I'm going to talk about the objectives of the review. Next slide, please. As you will see on the next slide, the standards address a number of internal audit matters. To determine conformance with each of these requires me to analyze each of them individually to make sure that the work that has been done conforms to the standards. And use the term conformance does not mean perfection, but it's really a judgment as to whether the audit organization's work is conforms with the standards. Next slide, please. And these are some of the things that are addressed in the standards. For instance, the standards require that the purpose, authority, and responsibility of the internal audit activity be formally defined in the internal audit charter. The organization, individual auditors must be independent and objective. The internal audit activity must have direct interaction with the board. Audit work must be performed with proficiency and due care. Internal audit activity needs to have a quality assurance and includes both internal and external assessments. That needs to be managed to ensure that the internal audit activity provides value to the organization. the nature of work defines the activity, internal audit activity to include improving governance processes, risk management and control. The standards address audit engagements to make sure that they are adequately planned and executed. There are also standards for communicating results. And then the last one deals with ensuring that there's a process for monitoring the resolution of audit recommendations. And now I'm going to move on to the peer review methodology and scope. Next slide, please. My work followed the Association of Local Government Auditors Guide for conducting reviews or organizations following IA standards. I did also add some interview questions for the Institute of Internal Auditors Quality Assessment Assessment Manual. So I reviewed policies and procedures and other governing documents, reviewed internal monitoring procedures and results. I reviewed 6 engagements, 2 assurance and 4 consulting engagements for compliance with IA standards. I reviewed staff CPE and independent statements. I reviewed risk assessments and work plans, interviewed office management staff and the county's executive management, followed up on previous review recommendations, and reviewed audit committee meeting minutes. The scope of the review was from July 1, 2016 through June 30th, 2021, I'm sorry. Now I'll discuss the peer review results. Next slide, please. In regards to my opinion, I issued a conformance opinion, which is the highest opinion. There are 3 levels, and the organization, the controller's office, definitely conforms with the IA standards. And again, this means that I determined that the office's internal quality control system was suitably designed and operating effectively to provide compliance with IA standards for audits conducted during the period July 1, 2016 through June 30th, 2021. I also issued a separate management letter, which I will now review. This management letter identifies some areas where the office excels and offers several suggestions for improvement. And I will discuss the management letter on the next few slides. Next slide, please. I think I was very impressed since I did the review in 2016, and very impressed with what the office did during that period of time. There were 3 issues that I raised in the last review. Those are that the standards require the chief audit executive to annually confirm its independence with the board or audit committee. Also mentioned that the standards address quality control assurance, and that there was a need for quality control checklists on individual engagements, and that needed to conduct internal quality assessments at least annually and report the results of its internal and external assessments to the audit committee. And that the standards also require the chief audit executive to establish a process to monitor whether management is effectively implemented audit recommendations. And as I mentioned, those issues were not addressed adequately in the first review, and they have been fully addressed since the last review. As like I said, they did a very good job with doing that. A couple of other areas. I'll move on to the next slide. A couple other areas where the office excels from my interviews with executive leadership, which included Supervisor Vanderpool, Sisson County Administrator, and Fire Chief Norman. And interviews with that group basically said that they either strongly agreed or agreed that the internal audit activity is perceived as adding value and helping the organization achieve its objectives. So I got very positive comments, I think, from my interviews about the audit function. And I also wanted to note that the audit documentation is very thorough and well organized, facilitating the review of engagements. And the office uses a number of templates in its work, providing consistency in terms of how audit work is conducted and documented, making it very easy to review their work. Next slide, please. So I had two observations and recommendations, which I'll now go over with you. And the first one deals with this, just a little bit of background, that the standards provide or devote significant attention to identifying and managing risks, and that the standards require the chief audit executive to establish a risk-based work plan to determine the audit priorities consistent with the organization's goals. And the standards state that in developing the risk-based plan, the chief audit executive should consult with senior management and the board to obtain an understanding of their risk concerns and processes. And although the office does perform a risk assessment annually and develops a work plan from that, I thought that the process would be enhanced if input was obtained from senior management and the board in completing the annual risk assessment. So that is my first recommendation, that the office consult with senior management and the board in completing the annual risk assessment. Secondly, the standards also require the internal activity to evaluate risk exposures relating to achieving the organization's strategic objectives, reliability, integrity of financial and operational information, effectiveness and efficiency of operations and programs, safeguarding of assets, compliance with laws, regulations, policies, and contracts. And the standard, based on that, are really looking for a broad view of risk exposures across the organization. And this is a difficult situation for the office to address because it only has 3 full-time staff equivalents devoted to internal auditing. And with its limited resources, the office conducts assurance and consulting audits, follows up on audits, does its annual risk assessment out of other activities. And as you've just seen, a significant portion of their time is spent reviewing incoming and outgoing department heads. So it is my belief that the Tulare County would benefit from the office having the resources and capability to implement a more robust internal audit function that evaluates the organization's governance, operations, and management information systems related to achieving the organization's strategic objectives, reliability, integrity of financial and operational information, effectiveness and efficiency of operations and programs, safeguarding of assets, compliance with laws, regulations, policies, and procedures. And so my recommendation is for the organization, the auditor controller, to discuss with the audit committee the costs and benefits of developing a more internal audit function that evaluates the organization's governance, operations, and management systems related to achieving the organization's strategic objectives, reliability, integrity of financial operations, operational information, effective and efficiency of operations and programs, safeguarding of assets, compliance with laws, regulations, policies, procedures, and contracts. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about that.
So I have 2 questions for you, Mike. Number one, well, actually, I'll make a comment first. I did enjoy my interview with you, and thank you for taking the time to review the function of our audit and our internal controls here at Tulare County. First question is, how much did Cass Cook pay you to suggest beefing up his internal audit staff, and how long did it take for you to be convinced? I'm kind of curious. So.
No, I reached that conclusion independently, and it was something that I did discuss, I think, with the people that I interviewed as far as the executive team. And I think even as assistant county administrator was one that suggested that there be, maybe input from the department heads and from the board in terms of putting together their risk assessment and work plan. But, you know, when I was looking at the work and what I would say, and again, this was not something that that the Auditor Controller's Office brought up to me. I brought it up to them, but it was something that they were all also already, you know, talking about amongst themselves. And I just, you know, when I look at their organization, the quality of the work that they do is excellent. I mean, it's really, you know, quality work. But I think that there are areas, and I guess as a supervisor, I'd ask you, do you feel like it's addressing those areas of greatest concern for you as a elected supervisor? And
Well, and my response is, you know, clearly this is something that concerns me. I was one of the board members that helped to create the audit committee, and I've served on the audit committee since its existence. I think this is a very important function. And I think that given the resources, I believe it's important to continue to focus our attention as a county into protecting our assets. And basically, even expanding upon this is a point I've brought up over the years with this committee, is the importance of performance-based audits. How can we improve what we're doing? I mean, as you mentioned, we spend a lot of time in our internal audit division looking at department head changes and, you know, cash shortages, overages, et cetera. But what we really could be focusing on is how can we improve our operations, auditing what we're doing, and how do we improve our performance. And so I think there's additional things that we can do, and it's all a question of dollars and cents. And you know, do we put an extra body on a fire truck, or do we put an extra body you know, analyzing the performance of the organization? It's really a value-based decision. And I'm one of 5.
Yeah, and no, and I, as a longtime auditor, I'm aware of that, you know, the decision that you as a policymaker have to make, and that it is a tough decision to, like, okay, we're going to add one here in the audit department, but that means like one less fireman that would be fire person that would be out there. I totally get that. But, you know, I think the fuel audit that you just reviewed was, in my opinion, an example of the kind of work that's a broader focus than what I observed in the scope of my review. And so, you know, it seems to me that certainly the auditor has the qualifications, the capability of their staff to do that type of work. And I think that type of work will provide value to the organization and can ultimately pay for itself.
Right. And I can definitely see that too, Mike. And then let me just finish up with my second question. Sure. When you sign off on reports, do you sign Mike Edmonds, CIA, or, you know, because you're a certified internal auditor, or do you try to stay away from that designation?
Well, yeah, I've been warned not to use that term. So I try to put it. I tried.
Right, I thought I would check with you.
And there literally years ago, there was a discussion amongst the Institute of Internal Auditors whether that was the title that they wanted to use, and would be appropriate to use. And so,
well, given all the blemishes on the CIA name here recently, you might want to avoid that.
Yeah, true.
All right, CAO Britt had a question for you.
Yeah.
No, I just really a comment. Mike, thanks for the audit review, and I think you're just confirming what we already know. We have a great auditor office, and they do a lot of great work. And someday the auditor controller can wrestle more staff out of that mean CAO. But for now, keep up the great job, and we appreciate all you do. And I know sometimes you know, there's always a sort of underappreciation sometimes for the auditor group, and but you do a lot of great work and have helped us move a lot of things forward that probably wouldn't have previously. So appreciate that.
Go ahead, counsel.
Question, comment, maybe. So in regards to recommendation 1 about consulting with senior management and the board and completing the annual risk assessment, Mike or Kelsey, how do you envision that coming about, assuming that recommendation was going to be put into place? Is that some sort of study session with the board to present an analysis? What would that essentially look like?
Well, I can speak to what what process that my organizations have followed in different government auditing organizations within California. When we try to put together a work plan, we will send out letters to the department heads and to the governing body to ask for their input, explaining that we're trying to put together our risk assessment process and our work plan and get their feedback, and also open it up for, if they want to meet in person, we're happy to do that. But it usually kind of goes like, a few months ahead of their date for, putting together the risk assessment and work plan.
Yeah, that's what we were kind of planning on doing, is just sending out emails. And then if you would like to meet in person type thing, we can, but sending emails to the board and to department heads before our risk assessment, kind of getting their feedback on, what areas they've seen that they think are risky or what they'd like us to look into. So.
Okay.
All right, any further questions or comments?
Just one quick comment. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Mike contacted me during the height of this KMP and Windy fire. And
Yep.
I said, I was peer review. I thought, man, I'm going to get rid of this guy. And I said, show up at 7 a.m. and I'll meet with you. And sure enough, he was knocking on the door at 6:45. So yeah, it was good. Thank you. Talked a little bit.
Well, and I do recall that you were going to had to go out to the fire that was around Kings Canyon, Sequoia, in late September. But we still worked out our interview questions and got in a few comments about the Oakland A's. So that
Absolutely.
enjoyed the meeting.
Me too. Thanks, Mike.
Mhm.
All right, if there's nothing further, this is a request to review and accept, so I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
I have a motion from
Second.
CEO Britt, second from council. All in favor, signify by saying aye. All opposed, the same. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, next we're going to move on to take up item 8. This is a request to review and accept the internal assessment report.
So I'll be presenting that item. My clicker works. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so our audit standards require that we have a quality assurance and improvement program, or QAIP, which includes ongoing monitoring, external assessments, and internal assessments. Ongoing monitoring is the day-to-day supervision, review, and measurement used to evaluate the division's efficiency, effectiveness, performance, and conformance to the standards. Some examples of ongoing monitoring that we do include tracking key performance indicators for each engagement, such as comparing actual hours to budgeted hours, ensuring that staff complete the required continuing professional education hours. In fiscal year 21, all staff met or exceeded their CPE requirement. Sending out post-engagement surveys to the department head and our main contact for the audit to obtain feedback on our performance as we continually strive to improve our services. And completing supervisor checklists at the end of each engagement to ensure our audit was in conformance to the standards and work papers and audit documentation were sufficient. Part of our ongoing monitoring is tracking the number of engagements that we complete each year. The chart on the slide shows the types of engagements we have completed in the past 3 fiscal years. As you can see, most of our time was spent on department head change engagements this past year. And then due to the increase in department head changes and also the time spent monitoring for COVID relief funds, so the CARES Act, and for ARPA, we were only able to complete 1 risk-based audit this past year. Additionally, we perform fewer follow-up engagements due to the transition to an annual follow-up review, beginning with calendar year 2021, and we'll be presenting those results at the next meeting in April. Another focus of our ongoing monitoring is our efforts to improve compliance countywide. One way we are able to achieve this is through our new annual follow-up review. So prior to performing our annual follow-up review, we performed individual follow-up engagements for each initial audit, and extensive periods could pass before our first or subsequent follow-up audit. So under this new annual follow-up process, all findings are reviewed every year. We believe this new process will encourage departments to implement recommendations more promptly and therefore improving compliance countywide. It also allows us to streamline the follow-up process, saving time and opening up resources to perform other engagements. Another one of our efforts to increase countywide compliance was by assisting HR&D with reviewing MOUs for labor unions. We offered suggested revisions to help improve clarity, especially in areas related to payroll. We believe the new language will help departments better comply with the MOUs and also help employees better understand their payroll. Another one of our efforts to increase countywide compliance was through monitoring and reporting for COVID-19 relief funds. So during fiscal year 21, the county received $48.9 million in aid under the CARES Act. The division was responsible for reviewing the eligibility of expenses submitted by departments and for compiling and reporting the expenses to the California Department of Finance. This helped to ensure the county spent funds in compliance with CARES Act guidance in the event of an audit. Additionally, in March 2021, the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, was signed into law and the county was awarded $90.6 million. The division continues to monitor the eligibility of expenses related to ARPA and is responsible for compiling and reporting the expenses to the U.S. Treasury. Monitoring and reporting efforts are expected to continue through March 2027. As I mentioned previously, another element of our QAIP is external assessments, which are required to be performed by a qualified independent assessor from outside the county at least every 5 years. As Mr. Edmonds presented earlier, he completed our most recent peer review in October of 2021 and concluded that our internal quality control system was suitably designed to provide reasonable assurance of conformance with the standards, which is the highest rating achievable. Based on his review, he did offer 2 suggestions for improvement. The first suggestion is to consult with senior management and the board in completing our annual risk assessment. And like I mentioned, we'll reach out to department heads and the board to ask for their input during our next annual risk assessment beginning in the spring. And then the second suggestion is to discuss with the audit committee the costs and benefits of developing a more robust internal audit function. And we plan to put an item on a future audit committee agenda to discuss how we could achieve this. The last element of our QAIP is performing an internal assessment annually, which is a self-assessment performed by members of our division. The objectives of our internal assessment are to assess our conformance to the standards, evaluate the efficiency and effectiveness of the internal audit function, and to identify opportunities for improvement. Based on our internal assessment for fiscal year 21, we found that the division generally conforms to the standards, which is the highest rating achievable. We did not identify any gaps to conformance and concluded that we implemented all corrective actions from our prior internal assessment. However, we did find one opportunity for improvement. So our audit standards require that we document sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful information to support the engagement results and conclusions. While we strive to obtain all documentation pertinent to the engagement, we found that some information obtained during the engagement is not always included in our final engagement binder. So going forward, we will ensure that all relevant information is documented with our audit support. And that concludes our internal assessment report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, comments?
The only comment I have is thank you, Kelsey. Going back to the suggestions of improvement for consulting with senior management and the board. So I think that's a good idea. Just could you work with the CEO's office on how that might look? You might just want to structure because we want to make sure we're not independently just emailing
Oh,
the
right.
board and.
Yeah.
Yeah, making sure we have a process where maybe something comes to audit committee for a recommendation to the board and then the board can have its approval. Just
Okay.
making sure the process is spelled out clearly.
Okay. Yeah, we'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
And I was just gonna make a comment about the workload. You know, you look at your ability to move around and, you know, you may not be able to do as many risk-based audits right now, but we probably aren't gonna have an ARPA or any of these federal outpourings of funds on a regular basis. At least I hope not, as an American taxpayer, I hope not. But you know, the ability for you to be nimble and to be able to shift and allocate resources as needed, I think is important as well. Not to say that risk-based audits are not important, but we have to have flexibility to do these things when they do fall out of the sky, like ARPA, to make sure that we are in conformance, because those are going to be incredibly impactful funds throughout the county, and really a once in a lifetime opportunity for the county to invest in infrastructure and facilities that we really need to make sure we don't lose those funds and have to pay them back, because that could be detrimental to our overall financial position as much as a risky or frivolous department can be.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a big undertaking, but yeah, like you said, we do have to kind of shift gears sometimes when things like that happen.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, this is a request to review and accept.
There's nothing further, motion that we accept the report.
All right, we have a motion from member Britt,
Second.
second from,
Go ahead.
I'll give it to
You can
member
have it.
Flores. The chief's been kind of talkative today, so I'll go with
Sorry.
member Flores. All right, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next, we'll come up to item number 9, committee member and staff matters. Do we have anything for the good, bad, or otherwise of the order? No? Nothing? Okay. We will now move on to our chief's favorite item on every agenda. That is adjournment. Our next meeting will be held on April 14th, 2022. Thank you for coming to the open session portion of our audit committee meeting agenda. Open session is adjourned and we will go into closed session. Thank you all for attending.